Hello and welcome to Matillion's virtual series, Leading the Data Transformation. During this series, you'll hear from Matillion, Snowflake, and our partners and customers on how modern enterprises are driving real business value from data and cloud strategy. You'll learn how your peers select and implement a cloud data platform, the methods used by innovative and often remote data teams to get their first quick wins, and much, much more. No matter where you are on your cloud data journey, you'll leave each session with a list of actions to take back and use with your team immediately. In this session, you'll join Matillion and Ippon to hear best practice for setting your cloud data strategy and selecting partners and solutions that work for you now and carry you into the future. Our team of experts will walk through methods for right-sizing your initial cloud data migration project and share real-life examples using Matillion ETL for Snowflake to streamline your cloud data platform. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be discussing some strategies and tips for migrating to the cloud. We found that businesses are increasingly turning to the cloud for their data solutions, and according to Gartner, by 2022, 75% of all databases will be deployed or migrated to a cloud platform. We are joined today by our cloud data experts, Peter and Sean, who will share best practices for setting your strategy and selecting partners and solutions, how to determine your approach and solidify your strategy for a scalable cloud data architecture now and in the future. Additionally, we'll cover methods for right-sizing cloud data migration projects to deliver fast business value using solutions and tools such as Snowflake's and Matillion ETL. I'd like to kick it off by introducing Peter Choi, who is a data practice lead at Ippon Technologies. Welcome, Peter. Please tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Choi, and it's a pleasure to be here. Like Aaron has mentioned, I'm the data practice lead for Ippon Technologies for the United States. I have a little over 15 years of experience in pretty much every single pillar of data. So whether you're talking about architecture, whether you're talking about engineering, all the way to like reporting and analytics, I've dabbled in it and I've worked extensively over the years. For the majority of my career, I've worked primarily as a consultant, pretty much solving complex data needs across multiple verticals as well as industries. To be honest, my day-to-day focus is really providing the best data solutions for our clients to meet their needs. And it could range from anything from on-prem to cloud or even hybrid environments.
Awesome, Peter. Thank you. All over the place. And Sean,
yeah,
Mr.
hey,
Johnson.
Hey, thanks, Aaron. Super happy to be here. I've been in data warehousing for a little over 15 years, both on-prem and in the cloud environments. My favorite technology is data modeling, but I've done everything from ELT, business analysis, systems analysis and design, data warehouse architecture. Typically work in tools like Informatica, SSIS, Talend, use Perl, shell scripting, and then now, of course, within this cloud native environment, Matillion. So that's me.
Awesome. You've been around the block too.
A little bit.
Well, shall we get started then, guys?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, so let's run through our agenda today. So the big thing right off the bat is why the cloud? Why choose cloud architecture? Most people do it because they want to manage costs, move faster, have more choices, leverage scale, all sorts of things. We know moving data from point A to point B is the most time-consuming part with it. So having it all in one place, being the cloud, is super helpful. So today we're going to go through picking the approach, different methodologies that you might want to employ both now and in the future, and what kind of tools are out there that you can use to make it easier for you. And finally, when you pick partners and whomever to work with, what are some questions that you need to be concerned about? So with such a fundamental change to data management, infrastructure, and IT overall, Peter, where do you start?
So Aaron, that's a great question. And, just like any large data initiative, I recommend kind of kicking off and formulating a good cohesive strategy. And, especially when I'm building a data strategy, I like to think of three major areas to really help frame that strategy in the right way. The first is people, the second is processes, and the finally is technology. And the reason why I look at these three different areas as focus areas of building your strategy is ultimately you really want to gauge and understand what your current state is to really drive forward a future state vision and ultimately an execution roadmap of how to get there. So a lot of people ask me like why people, process, and technologies. And I think first off, when you look at people, you really need to understand, the skill sets that your folks have. You don't want to teach them, or even rebrand everyone in your company to learn something new. You'd rather build off of their current skill sets and enhance it and allow them to pivot it to take advantage of the new cloud architectures and technologies that are available. From the process standpoint, I think, just from a data process, if you just look at data processes, you really want to understand, the interworkings of all your processes. So, okay, when I'm moving one thing to the cloud, what else do I have to move in? And you really want to be able to prioritize all your processes so that you can create a more migration that's more strategic in nature. And then finally, technologies. When we're looking at technologies, there's a lot of technologies that can be migrated from on-prem to cloud with very, very ease. It doesn't really require much work. For instance, like a Unix script or a Linux script running on-prem will run on the cloud because it's almost the same exact architecture. So you want to make sure that you're evaluating technologies and also doing some additional research to see what's out there. And oftentimes you may deem certain technologies or processes even obsolete at this point. So that's why you want to take a look at technologies as well. Finally, just by looking at all these three different areas, you're able to gauge your current state, and then from there, provide a better vision and come up with that 360 view of your organization, and that will really help drive your move to the cloud.
Makes a lot of sense. Sean, do you have anything to throw in on getting started?
Well, yeah, I think so, because I think Peter hit on a couple of really good points there. And from the perspective of building out an enterprise environment, you really need to be able to kind of tack and tie your skills to your technologies and to your processes. And so one of the things I was going to ask Peter is what are some of the tools that you might use to maintain like a skills matrix or some type of a tool that you would use to manage what the training in my organization is, and then what are some of the tools that are available in the marketplace that actually support where we're at in our development and our journey versus a fully baked solution that you might find at AWS or something like that.
Yeah, so let me get started. I think it's like multiple questions there. So let me try to answer your first question, which is, how do you really start to understand your people and their skills and their capabilities? I always like to start off things with like a RACI chart, just understanding what their roles are, what they're accountable for and things like that, and just understanding how they actually interact with the business and exactly what they're accountable and kind of in charge of doing. And then from there, I actually start fitting in and filling out the skills that are assigned to each people and each person. One common trend that I always see, and later on we'll probably mention it again as well, but is the prevalence, and the amount of SQL that's available on-prem as well as available on the cloud. And so what we see is we want, just taking SQL, for example, we want to make sure that we're not like completely getting rid of SQL. We want to take advantages, but also look at those technologies that will enhance the user experience, enhance the computability, it's not a word, but the computability of that, and be able to enhance the cloud experience as well.
Hey, Peter, you mentioned a really cool topic in there called RACIs. RACIs are something that I've used in the past. And, to be really, truly successful in this data warehouse industry, you have to have buy-in across the board, from the lowest level developer who might be asked to get new skills all the way up to that C-level who has to write the check for this new software. So how do you use the RACI or other tools or technologies to really get buy-in across the board before you really get going on the project?
That's a great question. And just to think off the, just to think about it right now, I think when I'm using races, I actually see how much overlap there is within an organization, and how we have to align a clear vision across the board. And typically by seeing that, you could see areas where technologies converge and where different parts of the organizations require the same type of efficiency. And it will pretty much hinder the business if you decide to go with another technology, for example. So that's just one example. But on top of just using races, you also want to look at cost optimizations and the amount of time folks spend on a particular activity or not. Typically, when you go and talk with the C-levels, you want to talk about feature development versus operational costs. So rather than having teams focus on keeping the lights on, have them focus on being able to deliver value to your end clients and to your end consumers, and being able to translate that and quantify that into numbers and dollars typically looks good for the C-level executives.
So you mentioned a lot of planning, a lot of analysis, and so you finally come up with your plan, and it's like eating an elephant. I suppose you have to eat one bite at a time, but how do you make it happen? Sean?
I like to start small. I don't want to really go with a big bang approach. I want to be in an environment where I can generate some quick wins that show some ROI, and in a development environments where we're actually building up confidence within the developers in their own development skills, but also then with confidence within the tool. So I'm always going to be a start small kind of an individual, but I'd love to hear what Peter has to say.
Yeah, Sean, and I definitely agree with you. Start small is definitely the way to go. And in fact, the way that I see this is there's, multiple different methods of beginning and actually, starting off implementing your strategy that we've just implemented or created. And ultimately, I want to talk about 3 of the top areas or methods that I see in the industry right now, which is also ultimately lift, shift, and tinker, or even lift, tinker, and shift, depends on who we talk with. And then finally, the re-architect and re-platform. And these 3 aren't the only ways or only methods out there, but we see this as a primary trend. And just to talk really, really briefly about each one, lift and shift is really getting your current existing application or process that's on-prem and bringing it over to the cloud pretty much as is, no real changes to it. The only thing that actually changes is where it's running. It's on-prem versus on cloud. The second one, the lift, shift, and tinker, or the lift, tinker, and shift, it's pretty much the same thing, except you're trying to find out different things that are available on the cloud and different services that are available on the cloud where you could plug and play and really swap them out for increased efficiency. And then finally, the re-architect and refactor. That's where, typically the most time and materials and, most thought has to go into play here. But this is where you're actually taking a step back and you're reimagining how your application is going to run on these cloud platform and really trying to take advantage of all the cloud native features.
So I like that. With lift and shift, let's talk about lift and shift for just a minute, because lift and shift, of course, is going to get you a quick win. It's going to take you off of one environment and put you into another environment. And it's pretty easy to stand up these services within these cloud environments, correct, Peter?
Yeah, and I think it's also a good method to learn the cloud. To be honest, especially with these new organizations where you're talking about like doing some quick wins, some POCs. A lift and shift is probably the best way to get a lot of experience on a cloud that you may or may not have experience with. One of the things I always tell my guys is, fail fast and course correct faster, right? So, by being able to lift and shift and grabbing all these things and putting it on just virtual machines on the cloud, you'll be able to figure out and learn, you'll be forced to learn a lot of these nuances that are available and a lot of these concepts that are available on the cloud.
Okay, cool. So when I think about lift and shift, I'm thinking about creating, relational database services within the cloud, and then maybe porting my Oracle or my Postgres or my SQL Server into that environment, and then letting that run as normal. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about lift and shift. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And you know, in the past, I've actually had some customers um, gain some actual cost savings just by running on-prem versus on the cloud. And you know, just keep in mind that you know you are kind of gaining some scalability, some availability based off of just the fact that you're running on virtual machines on the cloud, but you're not really taking full advantages of the new services and the managed services that are available. Again, like if we're talking about a database example, this is just pretty much getting a database and bringing it onto a VM and installing it on a VM virtual machine and just running it as is, as you would do on-prem.
Cool. And then when we get into tinker, so now we're up and we're running and we're tinkering. And now when we're in tinker mode, what is it that we're really doing? We're not tinkering necessarily with existing SQL per se. We might be doing something different. Let's talk about what that kind of tinkering looks like and feels like.
Yeah, so let's build upon that example of bringing something, an application, let's say, with a backend database, right? You know, in the first example, we're just lifting and shifting. We're putting that database on virtual machines, and we're installing it on these virtual machines just like we're doing on-prem and doing exactly the same thing. Um, the key difference with the lift and shift and tinker here is we'll bring it to the cloud, but we may swap out the database. Instead of installing it on an actual VM, we may look at the managed services that you have available. So for example, on AWS, you may look into RDS, and if you're running Postgres or even Oracle or SQL Server, you may just want to swap those out. And then what you actually benefit from this is you benefit from the managed services. You benefit from the automated backup and operations that you know these services such as RDS takes care for you.
Okay, cool. And then I'm just a little bit interested in the replatforming, because to me, replatforming, re-architect is such a long stretch runway, right? Like, I don't even know if I've been at a company long enough to get all the way through a re-architect or a replatform. So let's just talk about that one pretty quick.
So typically and this is again like per application, per process that you decide to do this for. And when you have decided to do a re-architect and refactor, typically the driving factor or the real use case here is your current platform or your current architecture can't scale to the business needs. And something about your current state, you can't see it moving to the future. Whether it's an archaic kind of technology that you're using on-prem, you can't really move it to the cloud, or it's just the way it's architected, it's bottlenecked left and right. And you really want to take advantage of the scalability of the cloud. But like you mentioned before, this process is probably the hardest of the three that we're talking about here. Probably the hardest, most time-consuming, and most I guess difficult in terms of thinking out, and you have to learning, especially when you're starting your cloud journey here. But what we do see though is over time the cost savings is typically the highest for these types of projects.
So Peter, you just covered why you would re-architect. Basically, your hands are tied and that's your only out, on the go. But when would you employ the other two strategies?
We touched on it a little bit. I think a lift and shift is something like you would start off pretty much when you don't know anything about the cloud. Just getting exposed, doing some quick wins, and really understanding, how to leverage the best components within the cloud. And once you're starting to get used to that, you could actually, and I've actually seen people start off with a lift and shift, and then slowly start to tinker right after that, shortly after that. So it's kind of the more mature or the more adopted that you have on the cloud and the more accustomed you get to the cloud components, the more easy it is to go from lift, shift, and tinker versus re-architect and refactor.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead, Aaron.
No, go ahead, Choi.
Well, I was just going to talk about our cloud migration methodology slide, where we kind of relate these three different methodologies or strategies to a speedometer. And are we going 0 miles an hour? Are we going 25 miles an hour all the way up to full speed? And kind of where we came in as a group is that lift and shift is running at about 25 miles an hour. Lift, shift, and tinker gets us to a little bit quicker speed. And then when we're at re-architect and platform, we're actually running at full speed within that kind of cloud environment. And so hopefully he was hoping Peter could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, when you're completely re-architecting it, and I'll work my way back. You know, re-architecting, refactoring, you're basically thinking cloud first and cloud native. And so all your components are going to take care of or address you know, the key things such as like serverless, using managed services, and being able to scale up when you need it, scale down when you don't. And so this whole pay-as-you-go model and ensuring that you have 99.99999, you know, availability, you know, that's the thing about the cloud, right? So, you know, you're taking full advantage of that and you're thinking from that standpoint. You know, when you're looking at lift, shift, and tinker, you're gaining some of that because you're swapping out and you're, like I like to say, plug and play components from your original architecture with cloud components. You know, typically I see things such as like messaging buses being swapped out, you know, databases being swapped out, S3 being swapped out, you know, data lakes being swapped out, and even like EMR being leveraged in, for example, for Spark clusters and things like that. So there's a lot of things that, you know, can be easily swapped out, you know, and still keep the meat of your product or your application or your process whole. And by keeping and taking advantage of these new services and processes that are available in the cloud, you're by nature gaining, you know, these new efficiencies, whether it's scalability, being able to rerun, whether it's, you know, being able to scale up to larger instances, or even scale down in certain scenarios, rather than running it all on a single architecture.
So you kind of touched on the pace of change right now in the cloud, right? It's really exciting. The amount of innovation is tremendous. So what kinds of things are out there now? What products or services are available now to help people keep up, like, and make that transition faster? Like, what's out there? It's just moving so fast, and these projects are big.
Yeah, so you know, first off, let me start saying that, you know, you first have to pick your cloud provider, of course, right? So if you look at what's out there, you have AWS, you have Azure, GCP as the top three, and across the board, they have a lot of services, a lot of managed services, a lot of components that you could use to help expedite this whole process. In fact, you know, AWS also has something known as like Cloud Adoption Framework, which even helps, you know, when we're talking about the strategy effort, it helps lay out a plan and some good checklists and good material that you should do and you should follow along that, you know, planning process that you're starting out, especially creating your strategy. You know, AWS, Azure, GCP all have those types of kind of frameworks available to really help kickstart your migration. But, you know, on top of that, you know, we mentioned, you know, talking about leveraging your existing skill sets and you know, looking at your people and making sure that you're not reinventing the wheel, especially around their skills. And one of the things that I really want to talk about here is cloud data warehousing, because ultimately you're gaining the basics of SQL and you're applying it to and you're expanding it to allow for the full advantage of the compute capabilities of the cloud. So again, scale up when you need it, scale down when you don't. And ultimately what this allows you to do is it allows you to really execute your processes faster if you need it, or slow things down, saving costs. But ultimately it's able to deliver your actual end results to your end consumers. So deliver value quicker to your end consumers. And that's ultimately what we can do with cloud data warehousing today. You know, microservices again, are all offered across the board with AWS and Azure and GCP, but it allows you to, you know, think and deliver value faster in the way that you're not thinking about how your process or your individual kind of effort that you're working on affects the whole ecosystem. You're actually just thinking about delivering value for that little piece of code. And instead of worrying about a monolith application that may have all these inner workings together, you're just kind of working at component and component. You're able to deliver that and really push that to production very, very fast. So it allows for that. And, you know, the cloud providers also allow for the streamlining of these and creation of these microservices to really speed up delivery of these products. Last but not least, you know, we're talking about software as a service, SaaS products. I mean, each one of these cloud providers, they have a plethora of, you know, applications that are available on their marketplace. You know, you could just search for anything and you'll find an appropriate tool on the marketplace that could probably serve your needs here and there. You know, we're talking today about ETL, ELT, and Matillion, of course, is one of my favorite. And, you know, being able to easily, quickly spin up an instance of Matillion with a matter of few clicks, you know, really helps, you know, and provides a lot of value, especially around SaaS products. You know, other products available out there is, you know, you could enhance your monitoring capabilities with a click of a button. You could even have some ad hoc reporting really on the fly, and you know, all these SaaS products help you deliver value faster.
Yeah, Sean, that's a good segue, I suppose, to talking a little bit more about Matillion. How do you wrangle all these services both now and the future? How do you keep it straight?
Yeah, that is a great question. And, you know, one of the things that is constantly come up in this conversation today is SQL. We were in SQL 20 years ago. We're going to be in SQL 20 years from now. And, you know, so Matillion has really positioned itself well within the market because we speak to all of the data warehouses that are currently available in the cloud data warehouse market. We have modules built for Redshift, Snowflake, Azure SynOps, and Google BigQuery because we're a SQL generation tool. Before we kind of get into the tool, I do want to talk a little bit about the cloud data warehouse environment and what that kind of looks like and what you would need to expect if you were going to work in this type of an environment. These are going to be our on-prem databases. These are going to be API calls to third-party vendors that are sharing data with us for enhancement and enrichment of our data. This is going to be flat file processing. This is generally all of the data that makes your organization what it is. And this slide gives you a really good visualization of what Matillion is going to do with this data. You're going to pump that data into Matillion as an engine. Matillion is going to orchestrate that data and prepare that data for presentation in tools like Looker and Tableau and Power BI. And so this screen gives you a really good idea of where Matillion fits within the cloud data warehouse as a market. And then, of course, what are some of the warehouses that we provide? Now that you've sort of seen what we kind of look like, we'll give you a quick little overview of a couple of different types of jobs that we do within Matillion. The first job that I'm going to talk about is something that Peter talked about earlier. It's called sizing up and sizing down your warehouse. The reason why you want to size up and down your warehouse is to control your costs. You also want to be able to meet SLAs, right? So not only do you have to worry about cost, but you also have to worry about time to delivery. And so you may need to manage the way that your warehouse is computing based on time SLAs or dollar SLAs. What you're seeing in this screenshot is a very typical transformation job that Matillion would run. What we're doing is we're picking up a whole bunch of raw tables from an Oracle instance, and we're looping over those tables. So it's one component that's actually extracting about 50 Oracle tables from within the Oracle environment and pumping it into an Azure or an S3 bucket. You also see that we're moving flat files. We have about 250 flat files that we're moving. We're also iterating over that as well. So one component is generating about 250 files worth of data. One of the things that's really great about being in this data warehouse environment is we're just leveraging what other products are providing. So in each case, the cloud data warehouses have these optimized copy into commands. And so what you're seeing here is we're leveraging optimized into copy commands. And if I were to show you the behind the scenes, you'd see that we're just writing a copy command. We also have a generic API connector on here because we recognize that we can't cover every connector that's available in the market, but we want to be flexible. And so we provide you an opportunity to generate your own API connectors. And then also typically an RDS instance, relational database services from AWS. So this image is really capturing the full breadth of what you would be doing in a traditional ETL job. There's a step on this job that I'm not going to go into today. It's transformation. But within transformation, what we're doing is we're enhancing and enriching our data. We're repairing our data types, and we're doing a lot of things in SQL that will allow that data to be presentation ready. For this presentation, I felt like it was more important to show that, you know, we're fully integrated as a native web application development tool. And so we actually, from a component-based perspective, allow you to connect to, for example, in AWS CloudWatch. So you can automatically publish all of your task runs and all of that type of metadata to CloudWatch. We generate SNS messages. We listen on SQS queues. And so really we want to provide you with this really robust enterprise-like environment where you can start a job and stop a job with full documentation and notification. And then at the end of the day, actually have a physical report that you can then present to others within your organization to show the efficiency of your data warehouse environment that you've created. So that's a real high level overview. Peter, do you have any thoughts or questions on what we talked about here?
No, I mean, I actually, you know, love using Matillion, and one of the reasons why I like it so much is, you know, the fact that there are scenarios where you really want to deliver value very, very fast, and you know, at some of these times you just have to literally drag and drop a component into the, you know, the workflow, and everything will be configured, and you just have to set up, you know, a few settings here and there. But at the same time, there's scenarios where, you know, engineers will say it's very, very complex, and we have lines and lines of code that, you know, I can't do this in a UI. But at the same time, Matillion also offers that capability to really go in and provide that, okay, let me run a Python script or let me run a Bash script to really help transform your data even further. And it allows for that flexibility. So I think, you know, Sean, when we were talking the other day, you were talking about the no code, low code kind of, you know, paradigm. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh yeah, for sure. So what we, you know, at Matillion, we provide you this visual environment because we feel like visual development is easier to explain to everybody else, but it's just generally easier to follow. And then what our components do is they just generate SQL under the covers for you. And so each component that you're dragging onto that palette, it's just generally a SQL statement that's getting applied to some underlying SQL. And so what we like to do is give you a list of drop downs to select from. And then from those values that you've selected, we'll generate that SQL statement for you. And that's where I get us to a kind of a low code environment.
Awesome. Imagine that makes it go a lot faster when you don't have to constantly run it to see where you're wrong or learn a different dialect of SQL.
Well, yeah. And by the way, Matillion is a fully integrated development environment. I can query and view my data as I'm doing my development in real time. I don't have to leave the tool ever. I'm always within that tool because we've got a schema browser embedded within the tool. We've got a data sampler embedded within the tool and a row count embedded within the tool. And so really what we're trying to do is we're trying to present you with all of the tools you need within one web browser so that you don't have to move to all of these different applications and tools to be successful.
Super efficient.
Yeah.
I could see how the Matillion be hanging around for a while as you work through all your different strategies, regardless of whether you're fully re-architecting everything or not. So do you guys have any last thoughts you'd like to throw in there before we wrap up and get into Q&A?
No, I think I'm good.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's go to Q&A.
Well, let's wrap up first, Sean, if that's okay.
Sure.
So we heard that evaluating and choosing a strategy, then evaluating your people, processes, and technology, and how that play into your strategy is a paramount step to a successful migration to the cloud. We also heard that this process is never, ever complete and will need to evolve over time, just as your business evolves over time and your demand for data changes. Thank you, Peter and Sean, for sharing your expertise and experiences today. So let's get started with that Q&A. So our first question here is for Peter. What is the biggest source of failure for companies trying to move to the cloud?
Okay, so thanks, Aaron, for the question. So I see multiple different areas, but I'm just going to talk about kind of two of my top, I guess, areas that I see the most often. And I think we touched upon it many times throughout this conversation today, but it's don't try to like solve world peace all at once, right? And don't do the Big Bang approach. And the reason why I say that is, a lot of times you want to show these quick wins and be able to really showcase, okay, how can we have these optimizations? How can we get more efficient by using the cloud? And that's easier to do with smaller, tangible projects rather than having, okay, let's wait until everything is moved over. And oftentimes what happens is when you're learning some new technologies or you're migrating to a new platform, you have some of those gotcha moments or learning moments and teaching moments that you ultimately have, and you have to course correct very, very quickly and learn something new. And so that's why I always say, start small and really try to focus in on key deliverables so you could showcase quick ROI very, very quickly. The other thing we talked about, and you actually mentioned it right before in your wrap up, which is, this entire process is constantly evolving. If I were to look at the technology stack just 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, you'll see a drastic change in the number of technologies that are available, the number of methodologies, and also the tools that are, and the companies even that are there. I mean, over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been such a drastic change especially in the data landscape, and it's constantly going on now. So whether or not you feel like you finished now, it doesn't mean that you should stop this whole journey and stop evolving your product. You actually should start continually looking at your services and seeing how you could further optimize it and further get additional cost savings, and making it run even more efficiently.
Fair enough. All right. Our next question is for Sean, and it's a doozy. So should we be concerned with being cloud agnostic?
Yeah, we should. We should be concerned, because there are times where sometimes we pick things because they're easy and it traps us into a corner. And so we want to be very mindful and not just pick a given cloud provider because they have the most services available. We actually want to be able to look into their suite of products and say, okay, this, maybe this cloud provider's products aren't as mature as another's, but we fit better with them. And one of the things that Matillion tries to do is be agnostic. We want to be able to function on any cloud environment. And so and as a former Informatica developer, that was our big thing too, was being platform independent. And so, I think as you're building out your data warehouse environment, you want to be able to develop it on some open source and some closed source so that you give yourself the kind of the best of both worlds.
Makes sense. Peter, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, just as a best practice, whenever I look at any new technologies that I'm evaluating or things like that, I always look at open source because, you'll find that a lot of the open source products that, started as like an incubation project on Apache, for example, they're mainstream right now across the board, and they're heavily used. So I always like to kind of follow the open source community and understand what's available. But at the same time, open source technologies, or even programming languages like Java and Python, they're found everywhere. Things and concepts such as like Docker and Kubernetes, they're also found across the board. And these are all open source technologies, open source methodologies that are available. And I think it's actually, these technologies have become the golden standard across the board, across the industry. So that's why I always say, although like staying cloud agnostic is, one thing that you should always think about, I also say, by being able to look at open source and being able to evaluate open source, it will actually really help you out in this journey.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So the next question is, what about a hybrid environment, you know, between on-prem and in the cloud? Where does that make sense, and is it worthwhile? Either one of you.
I'll go with Peter.
Hey, I'll get started. So, you know, we talked about like the different, you know, methods of kind of implementing your strategy. And in fact, some clients actually say, you know, as part of one of their strategies, let's revisit it for later time. And so, you know, it may be such a you know, a critical business application that they don't even want to touch it or even have anything to do with it until after they've completely solidified their you know, roadmap into the cloud and they actually proved it out. So this is actually one of those scenarios where you can have like an on-prem and a you know, cloud environment and have these two environments co-located. But at the same time, I think it's also very, very beneficial while you're doing the migration to have both running and being able to say, okay, it looked like this in on-prem and now it looks like this on cloud. It's actually the easiest way to validate that your migration is really working and working well.
Some checks and balances built in.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, you know, it was one of the things that we had talked about earlier in the week when we were talking about, you know, how we're going to QA and we're going to test this environment, whether we're doing any one of the three approaches, being able to leverage that existing job that we know runs every day, and being able to validate, that's huge. I don't think we'll ever get away from hybrid environments. I think we'll always have hybrid environments. I think that we're in an evolutionary process, and as long as mainframe is around, we will have hybrid environments.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, just naturally move away from them as we can. Yeah. Well, guys, I think that about does it for our time today. I want to thank you both so much for your insightful responses. And yeah, unfortunately, we have to call it. But thanks, everybody, for joining. And for more information on Matillion or to schedule a demo, please head over to matillion.com. And for more information about Ippon Technologies and the services they provide, head over to ipponusa.com.
Well, thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, guys.